Hello, fabulous friends and fans. Welcome to this FAQ video. I am your astrologer, Nadiya Shah. Thank you for being here. And this video looks at how to use astrology in business and success. So it has to do with whatever it is that you define as success and moving towards that, particularly where it comes to being an entrepreneur, starting a business, launching a product in an already established business, or growing the business that you have. Now, I recently launched a business deluxe package specifically aimed at entrepreneurs and people who own companies or are part of the decision making of companies to help them grow and meet their goals where it comes to their business. I've had a lot of conversations with you guys. I love that. Facebook, Twitter, Google+, my website, nadiyashah.com, and the YouTube comments as well. And a lot of you have asked for me to share some of these techniques, like, okay, what is actually involved? What are you actually doing where it comes to creating an astrological business plan for somebody, which is what the Deluxe does. So this particular video is going to explain some techniques. I'll try to cover as much as possible. But this has to do with, regardless of where you are, if you're watching this, I'm going to be getting into some astrological techniques. So you should be at a certain level, even if you're just interested in astrology and you have kind of a working understanding of planets and aspects, some of the foundational stuff that I have in my book, Astrology Realized. If you have that, then this should be pretty easy for you to navigate and to start experimenting with. So when people purchase this package, they're directed to a form, and it's actually a detailed form. And so this is what you're going to need. Here's the information that you're going to need to start, the charts that you're going to create. The first is a chart for you. Create a chart having to do with you. If you can, if it's possible, if you don't know your exact birth time, look into getting your chart rectified. Okay, so it's a specific technique. I won't get into it that much right now, but still you can garner a whole lot if you don't have necessarily you have an approximate. Then what you're going to do is one way that I've seen astrologers use that is that they use a different technique called whole signs. Okay, so that's one way that you can move forward. Having said that, I think that there's a whole lot to be gained, even if you can just narrow it into like an hour, right? Ideally, pinpoint it, but if you have an approximate, that's great. And even if you don't, then you're going to focus a lot more on either rectifying the chart or looking at aspects to the planets in your chart. The other thing that you want to do is, if you have already started your business, okay, you've already started the business, you want to create a chart for the moment it started to the best of your ability. So for example, for me, when my website launched, that was my pronouncement to the world, if you will. That was my beginning. That was me saying, this is my path. I am going into the world of astrology full time. And that was, this year actually will be my 10-year anniversary. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'm sure I'll celebrate with you guys. But the year that this video is coming out, a little bit further into this year, is when my anniversary will take place. 10 years. It's amazing. An amazing journey. When you bring your spiritual path together with your prosperity path, it has a certain reward to it that is priceless. But that's my experience, right? That's my values. And we are going to look at your values in a moment by looking at your chart. If you have any partners, okay, like people who are actually invested in the business. Now, you could do this for coworkers as well. If you have key coworkers, that can be helpful. But especially if it's co-owners, then you want to try to the best of your ability to get information about their time, date, and place of birth. That's not always easy, right? It depends, how open you are and if the environment suits it. I often talk about how many years ago, way back in the day, like before university, I remember I was working at a major retailer, and when it was kind of slow, I would look at my coworkers' charts. We would look at the chart of a coworker, and I would talk about their chart. It's something I just did. It was fun. I enjoyed doing it, and I'd been doing it for so long at that point, and now even longer. So this some information that can start to garner, right? If people know, if you're open about astrology, then you can ask. But if it's not that type of business, if it's not that type of work where you feel like you're going to be able to share, your love of astrology, your growing learning in astrology, then there are nicer, easier ways to sort of do that. Like in downtime, I was born really early in the morning. What about you? Are you an early morning baby too? Like stuff like that, right? Figure out ways where you can safely ask and feel safe yourself while also allowing your co-partners, co-owners to also feel safe. And then we are going to look at, so we're taking your natal chart. If there are any co-owners, we have to look at their natal charts as well. Then we are going to look at the nature of the business. Okay, so what is it that you want to launch? What is it that you're trying to do? What type of business it is? Who's the guardian of that? So for example, if you're starting a cosmetics company, Venus is beauty, right? Venus has to do with cosmetics. So you have to make sure that Venus is in a strong position, in a strong placement. And we'll talk about that more in a moment. And that has to do with what's called electional astrology. So choosing the right moment. You won't ever get a perfect electional chart, but what you want to do is make it as strong as possible for what it is that you are trying to either start or launch as part of your business. And if you have an established business, we want to pinpoint the exact moment that started also. So your natal chart, co-owners' natal charts, the chart of exactly when the business started, if you have that or not, what is the nature of what you're trying to do next, or what type of business you're hoping to launch. That's going to be really, really important. And then finding the right time to launch. So these are the key factors we want to look at. So it starts with you, okay? It starts with what's happening in your chart. Now, I am very much of the belief that we can have anything that we want. We can manifest amazing things as part of what being human is about. That's part of the amazing part of being human. And yet, at the same time, I do think that part of being human means that there is contrast, that there are lots of experiences to be had, archetypally especially, and that they are universal, and that they are all sacred. Every one of the emotions that you feel are sacred. So if you are, having a time when Jupiter is trine your sun and everything's going your way, Jupiter's crossing the ascendant and making some harmonious aspects to other power players in your chart, that does suggest a certain ability to work with energy of manifestation, where you are able to understand the energy of alignment that much easier. You're able to bring yourself into alignment and see manifestation happen that much more quickly. But there are also times that are about recognizing that there are things that you don't control, that you are not a law unto yourself, right? There are a lot of things in life that can lead us to feel powerless. There are a lot of moments in life that say, okay, right now you have to surrender. You just got to let it go. You have to allow the universe to take you where it needs to, and you know that eventually you'll find your sail, even if it feels like a really uncertain wave, if you will. You trust that you're being led in a direction that ultimately you can use to move yourself towards greater love and greater wisdom, and ultimately greater personal satisfaction, a greater sense of success, or a different definition of success. And that tends to happen when we are having certain aspects, like basically I would say Saturn outwards. And especially if it is a major transit taking place. So, for example, now Saturn trining your sun is great because it suggests that there's an easy way to bring together a work ethic. There's a clarity and a grounding of what it is that you're trying to manifest, and that you are giving it the attention it needs. You are understanding that as much as you give is as much as you're going to get. But if you have Saturn squaring any of your personal planets, Sun, Moon, Venus, Mercury, depending on the nature of the business, Mars, again, depending on the nature of the business, but I would definitely include Mars in there as well. Then if you see that that's happening, if there's other really great stuff happening, again, like Jupiter's doing all kinds of amazing trines and grand trines and, you know, all this other wonderful stuff is happening, that can negate some of this energy. But if I'm looking at your chart and I'm seeing some tough aspect, a series of squares, if you will, to your sun or your moon, and this is when you're trying to start this business. If I'm seeing Pluto as well, right? These are two planets strongly connected to not having control, not having power. Now, again, all else being equal, you can negate some of that energy by emphasizing other parts of the positive aspects that might be taking place. But look, sometimes people have, and you might have, sometimes some charts are very concentrated, right? They have these very concentrated pockets of energy. So maybe when you look at your chart, you see all your planets are in the 11th and 12th houses, or maybe all your planets are in the 3rd and 4th houses. I've seen all these kinds of charts where all the planets seem to be in 1 or 2 signs, and then you might have a random planet here or there. A very good friend of mine, I remember, he had all this water and earth. All his planets were so water and earth and harmonious. And then he had this Aquarius moon above the horizon, all these other planets below the horizon, this Aquarius moon out there. And it was so fascinating. And he is an amazing person, but it's so fascinating to see because there is that sensitivity. There is an intuition there. There is a practicality there. There is a desire to make tangible things happen. And then there's that Aquarius moon that cannot always, because of the way it's aspected, because of the way it's speaking to other natal planets, is not always playing well with these other intentions. And so the trick is to learn in natal chart to deal with this, but also to find moments where that moon, and especially the moon, has to be well aspected. Now, it doesn't matter what kind of business it is or what product it is that you're launching. I do think that you definitely want the moon to be well aspected. And you want to watch Saturn squares, Neptune squares, Uranus squares, Pluto squares. So Saturn squares, it can feel like there's resistance. It can feel like you can't get what you want. And so that's energy that you want to allow to pass or wane. Okay, so normally when you get Saturn squaring your sun, let's say you get Saturn squaring your moon. The moon is very important because the moon is a sense of peace within yourself. And you want to be sure that your business is allowing you that, is allowing you to feel that you're in that place where you feel emotionally satisfied and at peace with yourself. You feel a sense of equilibrium. You feel like you have what you really need to feel cared for, and that you are caring for yourself by caring for this business. You want to be sure to start the business at a time when the moon, and especially your moon, is well supported. But also when we get to the electional part of this video, I'll talk more about the moon as well and how important it is for that to be well aspected. So in your own chart, let's say you have Saturn making a series of 3 squares, right? And it'll happen within a year's time, normally. You'll get these 3 squares within a year. And you see that that is happening. It might not necessarily be the greatest time to launch into this whole big venture, all else being equal. That energy of that square is negated significantly if if you have wonderful, positive other things happening to your moon at the same time. So squares in general, squares from Saturn, it makes it feel like you can't get what you want, especially depending on the nature of the planet, where you just feel like you're giving so much and not necessarily feeling a sense of return. So squares to Mars, squares to the moon can lead to feeling tired. Squares to the sun can also feel like, wow, this is taking a lot out of me. Is this really something that's true to myself? So there can be that tension there. Squares to Venus, that has to do with prosperity, okay? So it can be that you feel like you're working a whole lot for the gains you make on a financial level. And then there is squares to Mercury as well. So that can have to do with, how do I communicate? How do I share? And feeling like there's a lot of work involved in figuring out the right way to get your message out there. Mercury has to do with advertising. It has to do with word of mouth. It has to do with really so much, like even an internet presence more and more is a more mercurial thing because it has to do with interacting with others as part of your business. So if you have those Saturn transit squares, sometimes oppositions, yes, because it can feel like these outside forces are putting a lot of pressure on you. Just allow it to wane. Like I remember when I started my business, I just knew that this was it. I knew that this was the time. And I had a general idea of what the electional was going to look like. But now that I've been doing this with this particular, I've had my website now for almost 10 years. More and more I see how the chart is manifesting in ways that I hadn't always or necessarily anticipated, but have been very rewarding nonetheless. So you want to watch those Saturn squares, at least let it wane a little bit. So all I'm saying is if you see the Saturn squares exact, just wait when it is, a good 10 degrees away, let that space happen there. Let it be at least 10 degrees away from a personal planet. Some would say 6 to 10 or more if you can. Then it negates the significance of that aspect. Squares of Uranus can suggest that all of a sudden you want to do something different. If you launch your business and your business has Uranus that squares your sun. So remember, we're looking at aspects to your chart to make sure that when you're starting your business, it's working with you, it's harmonious with you, it's helping you to go where it is that you desire to go on every level. And especially when it's your own thing, it's so much of you giving something of yourself, right? It's about personal satisfaction, defining success for yourself, having a sense of independence. These tend to be very common reasons for wanting to start your own business or be part of expanding a business that you already have. So there's that factor as well with Uranus. This can bring just big changes in terms of what you understand, which way you're going to go. It can also bring with it sometimes some unexpected results. Again, all else being equal. Lots of things can negate some of this energy, and I'll get to that in a moment. Neptune can bring loss of energy. So we're looking at tough aspects, right? Easy aspects, sextiles, trines, sometimes conjunctions, especially when they're trining something else. That's a little bit different. But when you look at your own chart in relation to the transits taking place now, Neptune squares and oppositions, sometimes the quincunx as well, can just have a lot of energy just pouring out. And the same thing is true for Pluto as well. Also with Pluto is so much about powerlessness. And so you want to the best of your ability, make sure that Pluto, right now, what Pluto's doing in your chart is as harmonious as possible. I also think that you want to look at your chart and look at what's happening to the nodes. This is so important. It is so important. Look at what's happening to your nodes right now. If you have any planet, I would say Jupiter out, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, on your south node, not the time to start a business. Definitely not the time to start a business, because the universe is trying to get you to understand what has to go. The universe is trying to get you to create space in your life. Now, there might be other endings that happen, right? Like it might be that you realize, or for whatever reason, the company you're in downsizes, and so that job leaves, and that can create space for you to start considering what you're going to do next, what the nature of the business that you want to do is going to be. It can help you to start, as you are letting one thing go, understand now slowly but surely what you want to start putting into place. But when those conjunctions are very close to or exact to your south node, really not the time to start a business, because it is a time of closure, karmic closures, knowing what chapters have ended, knowing who you no longer are, especially if it's Saturn or Pluto. With Uranus, just very unexpected endings can come about. And so when I see that, I would say wait, or at least let that energy wane significantly, let that orb widen, at least 6 degrees, I would say at least 10 if you can. You also want to look at what's happening with your north node. Now, you know, again, when I chose the start of my business, September 1st, 2006, midnight in Toronto, what I remember most about that time, I do remember looking at the electional, but I know that it felt right. That was the main thing I remember. It felt right. And there was stuff happening in my natal chart as well that felt really right. So one of the things is that with my business, now it's not really a business, it's kind of, but it isn't, you know, like it's me, right? So it's an expression of myself, but it is also something that is an entity of its own that I have a relationship with, because I am a person who has other things happening as well. The business or the work is in many ways part of my spiritual path, but then other things are part of my spiritual path as well. So there has to be a good relationship all around. So for example, for my business, Jupiter was on my north node at the time that I started the business. And so that was that feeling. That was, you know, this has got to happen right now. And this is going to happen right now. And so with that, it says that this whole idea of how my business, my work is my spiritual path is further reinforced, because the Jupiter of NadiyaShah.com is conjunct Nadiya's, my north node. So you want to make sure you have strong positive placements on the north node, especially considering what is the nature of what you're trying to do, and especially the outer planets if possible. Might not always be possible, but if it's possible, great. If not, that's okay too. But the main thing is that you want to make sure you don't have really intense south node energy happening, because then that, you know, you're moving towards your north node in this life. The north node is ultimately fulfilling the purpose of the incarnation. It's what the soul desires to do with this lifetime, which isn't always a conscious process. We want what we want for all kinds of reasons that might not necessarily have to do with how it is that our soul desires to, or what experiences the soul desires to have, what karmic contracts we may have, and so forth. So that is first and foremost. Look at what's happening in your chart, but also look at what's happening in the chart. If you have co-business people, look at what's happening in their chart as well. And this can give you a good idea of when to start. Okay, when are we going to launch? And when you launch is going to be determined in large part by the nature of what you're starting. So, I mean, I remember, like I said, it just felt right. It felt really right to start when I did. And the moment that I started my business, actually, the 10th house of my business has Uranus, part of fortune, and north node. And those placements are actually conjunct in Pisces. And those placements are conjunct my natal midheaven. Okay, so I'm just using that as an example. And then the business chart has Neptune right on the midheaven. And so I see how this is more fully fulfilled itself, right? Saturn is in the 3rd house, like very close to the IC. So planets on the angles are very important. These are sensitive parts of the chart. And what I also have is a Sun and Mercury very tightly conjunct in Virgo. So with this website, my initial dream was, and this is in the 4th house, the Sun and Mercury in the 4th house. My dream was to write. I wanted to write daily columns for newspapers, and I wanted to have a client base that would come to see me at home, sitting at my kitchen table and doing readings for them, and the rest of the time, you know, be writing columns, daily horoscopes. That was my dream when I started the business. And that is the place I came from. I started writing horoscopes for other publications and for my own website, and I started building my client base as well. But the thing is that we're always going up, right? We're always reaching higher. And because of these very strong placements at the very top of the chart, this whole idea, you know, everything I do, and I say this to you guys, everything I do is about affirming that the universe is wise and loving. That really is key to what I do. Well, I think that that's Neptune conjunct the midheaven. That is so Neptunian conjunct the midheaven. The other thing is also, ultimately, as I've been going along, the part of fortune, Uranus, North Node, right at the very top of the chart, it is Uranus that is the guardian of the chart, has become the guardian of the chart. Now, I was thinking at the time, successful website, but it manifests in different ways, not always the way you expect, but still great ways. So, for example, I'm very mobile. I have a lot of freedom, right? I wherever I go, I can take what I do. Lots of internet stuff. Really, the businesses and the work that I do is pretty much entirely online and not based on any kind of borders at all. And that has what's been very helpful in creating a stronger and stronger business that feels more and more in alignment, has given me more and more of a sense of freedom. And that is something in my natal chart that I definitely need. So there's that element of understanding yourself. There's that element of understanding what is taking place in terms of transits to your chart and perhaps business partners. And then understanding what it is that you're trying to do, but also what is the sky indicating? What are you feeling? What transits are happening that are leading you to this moment are all very helpful as well. So now let's talk about the electional. This has to do with choosing the right moment to begin, choosing the right moment to launch if you're in an established business. If you have an established business, and let's say, you know, you order the deluxe package and you have an established business, and I look at the natal chart and, you know, you tell me, for example, like I said, we have to choose the guardian. If you're a cosmetics company, Venus has to be very well placed in the chart. Venus is very important because she is the goddess of beauty, right? She rules cosmetics. So it's important to have Venus in a strong position in a sign where she is particularly strong as well. If possible, ruling the chart. So we are going to try and find an exact time to launch, or rather, let's say you've already launched your business, okay? It's a cosmetics company. Venus is very important. I look at the chart. Venus is not well placed at all. You didn't see an astrologer. You weren't really into astrology at the time when you started the business, and Venus is not well placed at all. Then my suggestion is going to be start again. in some symbolic way, okay? Maybe change the name. You know, if it really looks like the business needs a significant boost, then we're gonna look at the name and the numerology of the name. That can be very important as well. But it's so important that the guardian of what you're doing is strongly placed. The other thing is the moon, and especially where it comes to anything that you're offering to the public or that has to do with wanting the affection of others. So the moon has to be well placed. It has to be speaking in harmony with other power players. It's got to also be in a strong position as well. Make sure it's in a sign where it's exalted or dignified. And also with the moon, one suggestion I have is, well, two actually. One is consider what is the nature of your work. So for example, if it's a cosmetics company, going back to that example, if it's a cosmetics company, having the moon in Taurus or Libra is helpful, because these are signs that are ruled by Venus. But also, like, what angle are you taking, right? Like, are you trying to be like edgy and, you know, kind of out there, like sort of, I don't know if you guys know, there's a company called Manic Panic. They make these very vivid hair colors. So a company like that would want, yes, a strong Venus still, but, you know, you throw in some Uranus there, it's not a bad idea. Throw in, you know, an Aquarian moon, not that bad an idea, but you want to make sure that that moon is in as harmonious a position as possible. And if possible, the moon is in an angle, in one of the angular, and particularly if it can be above the horizon, that's even more helpful as well. Because above the horizon, planets are visible, so it means that it's able to get out there more. You want to have the moon growing. If you want this business to grow, launching it, you know, after a full moon while the moon is waning, not a good idea. And also very important, you want to make sure the moon is not void, because if the moon is void, it becomes hard to make connections. And it could be also, all else being equal, the moon being void, it can also mean that there ends up being an element of isolation to what it is that you're doing. You might have a certain crowd that's very dedicated, but it will be, you know, it's not necessarily something that is reaching out to a lot of people. It might just become a very niche, kind of separate type of business that is sort of seen for a very particular niche, and okay, that's kind of out there, not really connecting with the masses. So that's not what you want also. So the moon being very important, the ascendant also being harmonious to your intentions with your business as well, important, because that's sort of the immediate impression, right, that you're making. And then the midheaven of the business and what planets are near there especially say something about the larger legacy of the work that you are doing. So especially if it's like spiritually, personally, it's an authentic expression of yourself, you want to be sure that you are launching at a time when you've got this strong midheaven playing out in alignment with what you're launching. But in particular, so let's go through some of the guardians, okay, of the chart, because that is very important to determine. The moon is always important if it comes to reaching people. If you want people to love what you're doing, and if you want to reach as many people as possible, you want a strong moon. But other than that, the moon does rule homes, okay? It rules mothers. So any business that has to do with anything from real estate to redecorating, interior design. If it's interior design, if it's aesthetic changes, you want to make sure Venus is also in a nice position. And also if you're doing something like, you know, mommy and baby yoga or maternity clothes, like this type of stuff, also very, very good for a strong moon, particularly Cancerian moon, right? but really good for the moon being especially dominant, but good for, again, Cancerian moon. Okay, so the moon in general represents these things. It also does represent, I gotta say, okay, Scorpio, if I may get a little bit explicit. Scorpio is things like lingerie, but if you're looking at it from a more practical perspective, inner clothing from a more practical perspective, then that is also Cancer, geared towards women, that is. And that's also the moon as well. So the moon having to do with, you know, very feminine or very home related stuff, kitchen products as well. Then we have the sun. Okay, so the sun has to do with performance. It has to do with acting. It has to do with putting yourself out there. And it has to do with drama and presence. So if you're starting a PR company, you want, you know, sun to be dominant. You know, you want the sun to be a very sort of dominant energy in this chart. Try to have Leo on the ascendant as well, because that makes you somebody that, you know, people feel is influential. If you have to schmooze for your business, you want to have a strong sun also. But if you are, you know, even if you're a performer, if you're an actor, you want to watch the ascendant of when you're starting. Like, let's say you're starting your website, have a Leo ascendant is always good because it projects a sense of confidence in what you're doing, a sense of going somewhere. Mercury is blogs, okay? It's communicating information. Maybe you want to sell cell phone stuff, very mercurial. It can be the internet as well. Writing, and especially things like writing books, if that's something that you want to do, then you have to have a strong Mercury. If you want to reach people through the written word, strong Mercury, but really communication of any kind. If you're trying to do something that has to do with people having to call, right? Or you're having to call lots of people and creating those connections, and also, you know, sort of having to be really busy and be about these types of businesses, networking businesses, covered under Mercury, media businesses covered under Mercury as well. Sometimes this has to do with toddlers, okay? So if you're like, you know, wanting to create a shop specifically geared towards toddlers, then this can also, in some situations, play out. So the guardian of, like I said, Venus. I talked about Venus quite a bit. So Venus is the guardian of beauty, love and beauty all around. So anything from a spa to cosmetics to clothing, anything that's about beautifying, you want to make sure that Venus is strongly placed. Mars is athletics. So anything having to do with athletics. Also, you know, Mars is like the soldier, right? It has to do with law enforcement. And it has to do with, as I said, athletics of all kinds. So if there's anything under that umbrella, from a gym to creating certain specific uniforms that are geared at these types of, you know, law enforcement types of companies, or rather organizations, then you want Mars to be in a very strong position. Also weight loss. So if you're creating a weight loss company, which a lot of people tend to do, if you want to be a representative for some weight loss product, and you're starting it as your own venture, Mars should be in a good position, harmonious position, because it does suggest that like people will see results, if you will, right? You'll be able to demonstrate the results. The next planet is Jupiter. So Jupiter is higher learning, it's politics, it's legal matters as well. So if you're starting anything associated with legal matters, strong Jupiter. Interestingly, you know, very famously, Nancy Reagan used an astrologer to advise her husband, President Reagan, back in the 80s, you know, the best times to do certain meetings. And back then, like it's been said, talking to people who've been around for a while, practicing astrology for a very long time, that it was uncanny how he would plan, like, some great agreement would be reached, and Jupiter was having in a very harmonious conversation, having a trine with some other power player. So it just became so uncanny, so predictable, right on the dot, that he was making these major waves when, especially a dominant Jupiter, but depending on what it was that he was trying to present or trying to make happen. But if you're in any kind of politics, you want to launch your campaign, make sure Jupiter is in a strong position, because that is the beginning of whether it's your political career all around or whether it is just the beginning of this particular campaign. You want to make sure Jupiter is well placed. Sag on the ascendant is good, but it really depends on what your platform is. So if you're running as a very family values type of person, then you want to make sure also Cancer on the ascendant or Capricorn on the ascendant, strongly placed Saturn and strongly placed Moon as well tend to be important. If you're running, as someone very progressive, then Uranus can, but Uranus has got to be stabilized with Saturn. So if you've got if there's a nice, like, for example, late 2016 and into 2017, Uranus and Saturn will be making a series of harmonious contacts. So this is really good for stabilizing what otherwise might be a more out there, or perceived as an out there kind of message. Saturn is about structures, right? It's corporations. So if you are looking to incorporate your business, especially if you're looking to do something that in some way will solidify the power of your business, then having a strong Saturn to launch that can be really helpful. Now, Saturn does sometimes represent limitations, or at least it represents a part of the chart where you have to pay attention to what's happening. Like you have to go over it 3-4 times. So for example, my book, the first sort of edition that was released was a PDF, and it was released, I believe, in 2012, and it wasn't well edited, and I take full responsibility for that. And the introduction, the preview got out there, and it was a mess. And so of course in my my business chart, I've got Saturn in the third house. And so that was like, oh wow, okay. Like that was a huge learning lesson for me, that, okay, if you're gonna communicate anything, if you're gonna write things, try to go over it again and again. And even then, sometimes I might have to go back and re-edit as well. So that's, you wanna watch. If you have Saturn in the third house, let's say, and you have a strong Mercury, you wanna write books, you've got to have another editor. You've got to have someone from the outside helping. So where Saturn is, sometimes you need an expert to come in. Saturn on an angle, it depends how you work it, and also really how you utilize it in your chart. So if you're the kind of person who works well with Saturn, you have a well-placed Saturn in your chart, and you went through Saturn moving through the 10th house and it was great, you accomplished a lot, you're really proud of yourself, then having Saturn in the 10th house of the business chart might work for you. But that takes a certain amount of reflection and knowing your chart and knowing what transits you've already been through and how they've gone, and looking at what else is happening in the chart as well. So Saturn ultimately has to do with being the boss, being the authority. Mercury sometimes has to do with being the expert, but I think, especially if you're trying to be recognized, this business is, you know what you're doing, you are the authority on a certain subject, then you want to have a strongly placed Saturn. Saturn becomes one of the overseers of your business, one of the guardians of your business. Uranus is the internet, right? Uranus is digital technology. It's the next thing, right? It's like evolving media, if you will. So there was a time when television was revolutionary and Uranus ruled television. And then the internet came along and Uranus rules the internet. Television, some people say it's still Uranian, but it's also very connected to Mercury now, more and more. So you want a strong Uranus, especially if online is primarily what you're doing. Now, for me, from my perspective, Uranus is often associated with astrology. So is Mercury. Depends how you approach your astrology business, or how you approach your practice, rather. So for me, when I saw Uranus at the top of the chart, conjunct the part of fortune, I'll get to the part of fortune in a moment, conjunct the part of fortune, that to me was, speaking to the success of the website. That was what I was thinking. The success of being able to reach a lot of people through my website and writing online. Like, that was what I was thinking. I didn't anticipate that it would, that it would become something else, that it would become more about the digital technology side of things. But that's the way that it ended up going. Neptune is good for glamour all around, right? I like to do it up for these videos. But Neptune is also compassion, it's spirituality. So a strong Neptune, or the guardian Neptune, especially if it's any kind of nonprofit that you're starting, something you hope will bring more compassion into the world, all these types of things, this energy is strongly indicated with Neptune. Jupiter as well, though, to a certain extent. And then Pluto is like investment banks, hedge funds. It has to do with power and wealth, but it also has to do with psychoanalysis. And so if you're a therapist, you want to make sure, especially if you're a therapist, and especially if you're utilizing, techniques that are very like those slow and steady gains, seeing this person week after week for a period of 2 years so that they can slowly change their life. That's very Plutonian. And so you want to make sure that you have a strong Pluto. Try to have Scorpio on the ascendant if possible, but that's got to be the more dominant energy. So that should give you a general idea, but mostly it makes sense. Like, once you start to get to know the planets, like I talk about in my book, I think like the reason it's called Astrology Realized is because it's about your relationship to the sky. And the more that you fortify that emotional connection, the better your readings get. The better you're able to read, the better you're able to enter that zone where you hit on truth. And this is something that I talk about quite a bit in different talks that I do when I do events around the world. But having said that, with the business, I wanted to talk about the part of fortune. The part of fortune is just as it sounds. It's where the universe like really works overtime to try and bless you. Financially, but also spiritually. So it's abundance all around. And so, for example, I remember, like I said, I didn't want to be seen. I wanted to just stay in that, fourth house, Mercury, Sun conjunction right at the bottom of the chart. I just wanted to stay there. But it really was like people encouraging me and saying, you got to do video, you got to do video, you got to get out there, you got to, share on YouTube and this and that. Was really a big part of, it was other people really were encouraging me. And ultimately it was Uranus, like going to where the Uranus was discovered, was part of the realization that this was what I needed to do. Wherever the part of fortune is, the universe will bless your life. It'll try to lead you in that direction. So you want to be sure that your part of fortune is as strong as possible. Okay, so in an angular house, if possible, conjunct the guardian planet. If possible, in a house that represents your business. If possible, you look at the ascendant. If the ascendant and house are connected to your business, this is great. If you can add the sign element, that's great too. So the part of fortune magnifies whatever's near it. And so like I said, for me, 10th house is Pisces, Uranus, part of fortune, North Node conjunction in the 10th house. So that is, really about evolving as well, like really about moving beyond the familiar and going towards maybe what's not necessarily as familiar, but can really allow greater progress to be made. And Uranus is also like finding yourself, freedom from who you've been conditioned to be in favor of who you've been created to be, to paraphrase Jeff Green. So Uranus ultimately provides a lot of freedom, and that really ended up being a big part of, I have a very strongly placed Uranus in my natal chart. And so it's always been very difficult for me to have a boss. And it really was my experiences with bosses that became part of my determination to give my love and my energy to my work. So Uranus, it has to do with, of course, like sort of, as I have shared more, especially digitally, as I've become more myself, like sort of found myself in all of this, the more people I end up reaching, the more I honor my own journey towards personal freedom, towards understanding myself, the more wider reach that the business ends up having, that the work ends up having, the more views happen, the more friends and fans start joining in. So these are all some things to consider as part of the electional. It can be a little bit of fine tuning with the deluxe package. I give you at least 3 days and I explain them very clearly, why I'm choosing these particular days. These are all things that I go through as part of that deluxe package. If you're a student of astrology, you can start experimenting with this. If you know that you have the spirit of an entrepreneur, you can start experimenting with this right now. And I think I said, if you have a business and that chart is not good, then we've got to have some symbolic way of starting over with a better chart. If you sort of have to open, right? Like for example, I was practicing astrology for a long time before I started my website. The website was the symbolic beginning. That was the seed moment. But I was practicing for a long time, and then people started offering to pay me, years before I launched the website as well. My first professional gig doing, readings in general, I was 14 years old. So it was many years before I started the website that I had already sort of started in this. But when I claimed it, when I said, this is the beginning of a new path for me, there was lots happening in my chart that suggested that suggested positive, good things happening. And the start that I made sure that the energy was in alignment with what I was hoping for. But then, as I said, it ended up going in different directions. But if you have to open your doors, right? Let's just say your doors have to be open for whatever reasons. You have a physical business itself. So you're in a particular place. That's also very Saturnian as well. So if you have a Capricorn ascendant or strong Saturn, it tends to represent a physical place where people come. Whereas, like I said, for me, there's no borders to what I do. It's entirely mobile, it's entirely online, but that's not the case, right? Maybe you're starting a store of some kind. So you want to have a strong Saturn because it suggests longevity and establishing, like slow and steady, establishing a stronger and stronger business that lasts a really long time. So let's say you've got to open the doors. Well, make sure that your starting moment, there's fanfare all around. Invite as many people as possible, and make sure you're utilizing the colors of the guardian of your business in terms of the ribbon, the color of the ribbon, right? When you cut that ribbon. And also I'm really big on like sweets. Now this is sort of like a South Asian tradition. I think it's a tradition in a lot of the world, that when you have a celebration of some kind, right? You're starting something new, you have a baby, right? This is your baby. When you have a baby, you hand out sweets. So I'm really big on having like cake or sweets or whatever there, and nourishing people, having this be a symbol of pleasure and abundance and joy that is reaching a lot of people. So these types of activities are very good for the beginning of the business, a symbolic beginning. So have that be the moment when, the website just becomes something else. Even if you had to launch it earlier to, sort of gather investors, like let it be, you know, something else. And then there's a whole other layer of looking at the chart as well. So if you have a very strong second house of the business, that means that it really is going to be those one-off sales that keep things going. But if you've got lots of 8th house energy, Pluto energy, it means that you might want to invest in things that will pay off, like passive income, things that will pay off in the bigger picture. And so there's lots of different strategies, right, that we can figure out together, and also that you can start playing with yourself. Think about when you started a job, the first day when you walked in the time, what was the chart of that moment? Like go back in your life and then see how that chart actually played out at that job. All of these can help you to create a stronger connection to the sky, to learn more about astrology, and to use astrology towards your greater abundance, your greater success as well. And ultimately, success is what you define it as. And if you are in alignment and you consciously choose to activate symbols and images that are in alignment with what you consider success, you are sure to get there. Well, thank you so much for watching this FAQ video. Please like, comment, subscribe, thumbs up. I'm so grateful for it. And again, love connecting with you guys. Facebook, Twitter, Google+, my website, nadiyashah.com, YouTube comments. And for more about the Business Deluxe package, also check out my website, nadiyashah.com. I'm so grateful for this moment with you. It truly means everything. Until we connect again, take care.